On July 29, 2008, a mother of two named Susan Powell recorded a video where she documented the assets in her home in Utah just in case, in her own words, something happened to her.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
The video was made on her attorney's advice, who feared that Susan's husband Josh might attempt to sell some of her most expensive assets in the years leading up to the now infamous videos recording the couple's marriage, had been under a lot of strain. And during the recording, Susan lets on that things had been everything but peaceful between her and Josh over the past few years.
This is all stuff bought in a year or less through Home Depot on my credit. Josh bought a lot of stuff and then he had to bankrupt it. And then he bought a little bit more on my credit. There's a nice lamp. These are things to roll wood with. And I had necklaces too. I don't know where those are. I just got in a rage, as you can see, and broke this. There's duds and pearls and opals in there. Broke this and threw all my DVDs and made a mess because he was angry at me about a year or two back.
Although Susan had been seeing a divorce attorney to look into the possibility of leaving her husband, they were still living together in 2009, almost a year and a half after the video was recorded on the morning of December 6th of that year. Susan went to church with her two boys, after which a neighbor went to visit her, leaving her house at about 5 p.m. that night. Josh allegedly took the couple's two boys, Charlie and Braden Powell, on a camping trip in the middle of the night, in blizzard conditions, to a campsite on the Pony Express Trail, according to Josh. Susan stayed home because she was tired. The story goes that the next day, Susan's family and friends reported her missing when her two boys weren't dropped off at daycare. When Josh came back from the supposed camping trip with his sons, he said that when he had left the previous evening, his wife had been sleeping peacefully at home, and that he had no idea what could have happened to her after searching the couple's house in Utah. Police found no signs of foul play, but things continued to get stranger as the investigation continued inside Susan's safe deposit box at the bank where she works. The cops found a handwritten will and testament in which Susan alleged that Josh had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on her a few weeks prior. Disturbingly, she also wrote, "If I die, it may not be an accident." About 10 days after she mysteriously disappeared, the authorities also found that Josh had filed paperwork to withdraw money from a retirement account, and he was officially declared a person of interest in the case. Suspiciously, Susan's family and friends reported that during the search efforts, Josh never seemed to show a genuine interest in finding his wife. But despite the amount of evidence stacked against him, Josh Powell was never formally charged in his wife's disappearance during the investigation. The cops questioned the couple's two sons, but it was hard to get any solid information out of them on account of their age. Even though they mentioned that Josh had taken Susan with them on their camping trip on the night of the disappearance, they also made outlandish claims, including allegations that they had arrived at the campsite by airplane. This made it impossible to use their statements as evidence that Josh was responsible for his wife's disappearance shortly after Josh and his two sons moved back to their home state of Washington. But the authorities soon determined it wasn't safe for Braden and Charlie to be living with their father in the middle of the investigation, and Josh lost custody of the boys. This is where things get extremely disturbing on February 5th, 2012. More than 2 years after Susan's disappearance, a state caseworker brought the two boys to Josh's house for what was supposed to be a supervised visit immediately upon their arrival. Josh locked the social worker out of the house and took the lives of both his children and himself by setting the house on fire with gasoline if his behavior during the initial phases of the investigation was suspicious. The unspeakable crimes Josh committed on that day in 2012 were about as clear of an admission of guilt as you can get in a case like this. In the aftermath of the tragic incident, the cops started looking into Josh's brother and father, who they suspected knew more about the case than they were letting on. Even though they had solid evidence to suggest Michael Josh's brother and helped him conceal Susan's body, the case reached a dead end when Michael also took his own life in 2013, more than a decade later. Susan's dad won a lawsuit against Washington State for nearly $100 million on grounds of negligence and failure to protect the two children who were supposed to be in the state's custody, a big chunk of which he gave to the charity to support domestic violence survivors. Almost 15 years after her disappearance and murder of her 2 children, people still gather in Susan's hometown of Puyallup, Washington every year to pay their respects and honor her memory. The last video Susan made documenting her assets received a lot more attention after everything had happened. With hindsight, the videos portrayed in a much more disturbing light. Susan saying things like, "I'm recording this just in case anything happens," makes you wonder if she knew her husband could do something this horrible. As she was filming over the years, Susan's father has been alerted of possible locations where his daughter's remains might be buried, including abandoned mines in Utah and other isolated locations. Sadly, every lead has turned out to be a false alarm, and it's very unlikely that Susan's remains will ever be found.